Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The US says Taliban violence in Afghanistan is making it harder for the peace process to move forward. In an interview, General Scott Miller, the head of the US forces in Afghanistan, said the fighting in the country is at historic high and it could be more than a spring offensive. It comes after the Taliban urged the US to abide by the Doha peace deal and ensure the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Pakistan's military has killed 3 terrorists during an intelligence-based operation in the northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The military's media wing says the operation on the Aleem Khan Khushali group was carried out in the Mir Ali area of North Waziristan district. It said the terrorists were involved in target killing, kidnapping for ransom, attacks on security forces and IED explosions. Complete shutdown is being observed in Indian-occupied Kashmir against the visit of New Delhi's cherry-picked EU parliamentarians to endorse New Delhi's false narrative. All parties Hurriyat conference called for the strike, which was supported by all pro-freedom leaders and organizations. The EU Disinfo Lab has revealed that a 2019 visit of largely right-wing MEPs was part of India's propaganda campaign against Pakistan. Gunmen stormed a secondary school in central Nigeria, kidnapping dozens of children along with some teachers. Authorities have dispatched armed forces to rescue all the captives. It's not immediately clear who was responsible for the attack. The United Nations has warned of a potential escalation of violence in Myanmar. UN Special Envoy Tom Andrews' warning comes after deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi was slapped with an additional charge. Meanwhile, the opponents of the coup have called for bigger protests today to end the military rule. The UK is set to call for a UN resolution to help negotiate ceasefire so that people in conflict zones can be vaccinated against COVID-19. Meanwhile, Brazil has recorded 55,000 new cases and over 1,100 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 240,000. In Pakistan, over 1,100 people tested positive and 56 more died overnight, with the death toll reaching 12,436. While globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected over 109 million people so far. And in tennis, Russian Daniil Medvedev has secured his place in the Australian Open semi-finals. The world's number 4 defeated compatriot Andrei Rublev 7-5, 6-3 and 6-2 in the quarterfinal. Earlier in the women's singles, Karolina Muchova stunned world number 1 Ashley Barty with a 1-6, 6-3 and 6-2 win and advanced into the final 4. These are the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The US says Taliban violence in Afghanistan is making it harder for the peace process to move forward. General Scott Miller, the head of the US forces in Afghanistan, said this in an interview. General Miller said the fighting in Afghanistan is at historic high and it could be more than a spring offensive. He added it would be difficult for any side to make compromises if the violence is not reduced. An Afghan National Security Council spokesperson said they are ready for any kind of war, being in a defense mode. It comes after the Taliban urged the US to abide by the Doha peace deal and ensure the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan's military has killed 3 terrorists during an intelligence-based operation in the northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The military's media wing says the operation on the Aleem Khan Khushali group was carried out in the Mir Ali area of North Waziristan district. It said the terrorists were involved in target killing, kidnapping for ransom, attacks on security forces and IED explosions. The Inter-Services Public Relations says the area is now being combed to find any terrorists and their aides. Meanwhile, a complete shutdown is being observed in Indian-occupied Kashmir against the visit of New Delhi's cherry-picked EU parliamentarians to endorse New Delhi's false narrative.
All parties' Hurriyat conference called for the strike, which was supported by all pro-freedom leaders and organizations. The Hurriyat conference said it seeks to draw the attention of international community towards Indian occupation and oppression. In 2019, a similar visit by largely right-wing MEPs sparked widespread outrage from locals and politicians after they were barred from meeting them. The EU Disinfo Lab revealed in December that the 2019 visit was a part of the malicious propaganda campaign by New Delhi against Pakistan. The investigation revealed how Indian intelligence agencies bribed the MEPs with expensive vacations on tropical island destinations ahead of the visit.
Meanwhile, Pakistan says it firmly opposes the creation of new permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. Islamabad's envoy to United Nations says such an expansion will compound the Council's inequality and dysfunctionality. Addressing the second meeting of the Intergovernmental Negotiations Framework, Envoy Munir Akram said the addition contradicts the fundamental precepts of equal representativeness. He added UNSC reforms can stem through consultations to make the process more inclusive and widely acceptable. The envoy said the idea of a comprehensive reform can only be met through an expansion in the non-permanent category. Now, in India, a court has granted bail to an associate of climate activist Disha Ravi, whose detention prompted outrage across the country. 22-year-old Ravi was arrested last week on charges of sedition after she posted a document supporting farmers' protest. Police had sought the arrest of a Mumbai-based lawyer, Nikita Jacob, for allegedly working together with Ravi. But Jacob petitioned a court to stop the police from carrying out her arrest warrant. The toolkit document came into the limelight after global activist Greta Thunberg shared it on Twitter. Now, the United States says it is planning to recalibrate its relations with Saudi Arabia. This represents an abrupt change in U.S. policy from President Joe Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump. Talking to reporters, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Biden is returning to counterpart engagement. Psaki said the president will communicate through King Salman bin Abdul Aziz, as he is the U.S. president's counterpart. She said the two leaders will have a conversation at an appropriate time, and Washington will work with the Riyadh while highlighting areas of disagreement and concern.
We've made clear from the beginning that we're going to recalibrate our relationship with Saudi Arabia, and that President Biden, and one of the questions there was also, just to go back to the context of it, whether he would be speaking with MBS. And part of that is going back to engagement counterpart to counterpart. The president's counterpart is King Salman.
Well, now the U.S. has urged the Houthi rebels to cease all military operations in Yemen's northern province of Marib. In a statement, U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price asked the rebels to return to the negotiations table. Price said assaults by the Houthis will only exacerbate Marib's humanitarian crisis. He added if Houthis want a negotiated solution, they must cease all destabilizing actions, including attacks on Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen said Washington is aggressively using back-channel diplomacy to speak to Houthis. Timothy Landerking said Washington is working to energize international diplomatic efforts to create the right conditions for a ceasefire. Earlier, a UN report estimated that 1 million Yemenis have sought refuge in Marib since the beginning of the war to escape the Houthi violence. Now, a Tehran envoy says Russia, Iran and Turkey are determined to pursue peace in Syria. This comes as the Astana process guarantors meet in the 15th round of Syria talks in the Russian city of Sochi. The delegations of UN, the Syrian government and the opposition groups are also attending the summit. Addressing the participants, Russia's envoy for Syria said all must review consequences of unilateral sanctions on Damascus. He also called on the Syrian opposition delegation to separate themselves from terrorist groups in northwestern Idlib province. Moving on now, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says his Swiss counterpart Guy Parmelin have discussed ways to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. Rouhani told Parmelin the latest developments, one on a phone call. In a statement, Iranian President's office said both leaders exchanged views on Swiss humanitarian trade arrangement and regional security. Meanwhile, in a tweet, Parmelin said he also discussed Switzerland's mandate to provide good officers for Iran and the United States. The United States says the path to diplomacy is open right now with Iran over the 2015 nuclear deal. But U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Tehran is still far away from compliance with the deal. Talking to National Public Radio, Blinken said Iran resumes compliance with the JCPOA, the U.S. would do so too. He added any presumable future engagement with Tehran will require diplomacy. The Secretary of State did not address whether new U.S. administration has had any direct engagement with Iranian officials as yet. This comes after Iran told the UN nuclear watchdog it will scale back cooperation with it in a week. And the US says it has reminded Iraq of its responsibility to protect the coalition forces fighting ISIS in the country. This comes after a recent rocket attack on a U.S. military base in Erbil killed an American contractor and wounded several others. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi. Blinken discussed efforts to hold culprits of the attack accountable. Earlier, the State Department said the U.S. reserves the right to respond at a time and place of its choosing. The Iraqi Prime Minister also received a call from NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg to discuss military cooperation with Baghdad. NATO defense ministers are set to meet today to discuss several issues, including an expansion of the training mission in Iraq. Now in France, the lower house of parliament has passed a so-called anti-separatism bill put forward by President Emmanuel Macron's government. The bill will strengthen government oversight of mosques and religious schools, among other measures. Human rights groups say the bill unfairly targets the country's 5.7 million Muslim minority population. Critics call the bill a political maneuver by Macron to win support from conservative voters ahead of next year's presidential election. The incidents of Islamophobia have significantly risen in Europe, prompting concerns from the Muslim world, including Pakistan and Turkey. Now, the United Nations has warned of a potential escalation of violence in Myanmar. UN Special Envoy Tom Andrews' warning comes after deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi was slapped with an additional charge. Andrew made an urgent call on any country with influence over the generals and businesses to press them to avoid it. Meanwhile, the opponents of the coup have called for bigger protests today to end the military rule. They say the military's claim of holding new elections is false. The army detained Suu Kyi on February 1st coup, and her next hearing is set for March 1st. She now faces a charge of violating a natural disaster management law, as well as charges of illegally importing 6 walkie-talkie radios. Well, now, gunmen stormed a secondary school in central Nigeria, kidnapping dozens of children along with some teachers. Authorities have dispatched armed forces to rescue all the captives. It is not immediately clear who was responsible for the attack. The incident comes hours after bandits released a video of more than 20 people abducted from a bus near the Niger State. In December, Boko Haram claimed responsibility for the abduction of hundreds of students from a school in the northwestern state of Katsina. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories, we go to Brazil, which has recorded 55,000 new COVID-19 cases and over 1,100 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 240,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected 109 million others so far. More on the pandemic in this report.
While the World Health Organization notes a 16% decrease in the emergency of new COVID-19 cases, the end of the pandemic is a distant reality, especially considering the setbacks in vaccination campaigns and the spread of new variants. The United States has witnessed a drop in new cases and reduced hospitalizations for the 5th week in a row. Meanwhile, more than 55 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered in the United States. The Mexican government has decided to raise concerns at the United Nations over unequal vaccine access as the country tops 2 million infections.
Tomorrow in the Security Council, we are going to present Mexico and Latin America's position in regards to the inequality, the lack of fairness when it comes to vaccine access. The countries that produce vaccines have very high vaccination rates, and Latin America and the Caribbean much less. We are going to bring this to the Security Council tomorrow because it is not fair.
The United Kingdom is also set to call for a United Nations resolution to help negotiate ceasefires so that people in conflict zones can be vaccinated. Europe's drug regulator authority announced to issue verdict over Johnson & Johnson vaccine by mid-March. Meanwhile, Dutch Prime Minister has called on the nation to respect a nighttime curfew despite a court ruling that the measure lacked a legal basis.
The aim is to control the coronavirus as much as possible so that soon we will have all our freedoms back, but in a safe way. That is why we introduced the curfew, and that is not changed today. That is why I urge everyone to keep following the SOPs should our appeal not result in a suspension of the ruling of the district court.
South Africa says it will offer its doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine to the African Union after scrapping their use due to efficacy concerns. South Korean authorities warned against loosening enforcement of SOPs after the number of new cases hit the highest levels in nearly 40 days.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 56 more people have died of COVID-19, while over 1,000 tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. Health Ministry says the country's death toll has climbed to 12,436. The ministry said the tally of nationwide infections has reached nearly 566,000, of which 528,000 people have recovered. Meanwhile, the number of active COVID-19 cases in the country has dropped to 25,000. The ministry said over 1,600 patients are in the critical condition. Pakistan's foreign minister has urged the Egyptian companies to benefit from ample investment opportunities in Pakistan. On his two-day official visit to Cairo, Shah Mahmood Qureshi assured the Egyptian investors of every possible cooperation by Islamabad. Talking to a delegation of businessmen, Qureshi said both countries should further enhance their bilateral trade. The minister noted that Pakistan's improved ease of doing business rating depicts the confidence of the international community. Meanwhile, the Egyptian companies expressed their interest in investment in Pakistan's healthcare, energy and construction sectors. Egyptian company Al-Swedi Electric CEO also called on foreign minister and showed interest to invest in Pakistan. Now, the United States says it believes Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project is a bad deal for Europe. This comes amid Biden administration's review of the gas pipeline project from Russia to Germany. Talking to reporters, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said Washington will determine if sanctions are in order to stop the project. Psaki said the pipeline will divide Europe and exposes Ukraine and Central Europe to Russian manipulation. She added the project goes against Europe's own stated energy and security goals.
Well, our position on Nord Stream 2 has been very clear, and it remains unchanged. President Biden has made clear that Nord Stream 2 is a bad deal. It's a bad deal because it divides Europe, it exposes Ukraine and Central Europe to Russian manipulation, and because it goes against Europe's own stated energy and security goals. We're continuing to monitor activity to complete or to certify the pipeline.
Now, 21 people have died after a historic winter storm swept across multiple states in the central and southern United States. The deaths were reported in Texas, Louisiana, Kentucky and Mississippi. Authorities say the storm is not expected to relent until the weekend. The storm has left millions without power in Texas and Oregon. Officials drew criticism as the state's energy grid repeatedly failed, forcing rolling blackouts. The National Weather Service says over 150 million Americans are now under winter storm warnings. Meanwhile, the White House says President Joe Biden has assured the federal government's assistance to the governors of the hard-hit states. Yemen has become one of the most dangerous places in the world for children to grow up. The United Nations has warned that 400,000 children are in danger of death from famine. Half of Yemen's children are facing malnutrition. Details in this report.
Years of an armed conflict, economic decline, and the COVID-19 pandemic have pushed Yemenis to the brink of deadly malnutrition crisis, with rising levels of food insecurity. The United Nations says the humanitarian response remains critically underfunded. Clean drinking water, sanitation, food assistance, and livelihood support are an extremely rare luxury, as diseases make matters worse. About 1.2 million pregnant or breastfeeding women are also expected to suffer from extreme malnutrition in 2021. Many families have to resort to reducing the quantity or quality of the food they eat, and in some cases, families are forced to do both.
We have one meal a day, sometimes two, but often my husband and I don't eat at all so that our children can eat.
The fragile healthcare system is facing a collateral impact of COVID-19, which has drained meager resources and resulted in fewer people seeking medical care. The World Food Programme has reiterated that the war in Yemen has to stop.
It shows that after years of conflict, the Yemeni people can't take it anymore. They can't feed their families and they don't have the means to survive without massive assistance going into the country every month. The World Food Programme supports 13 million people every month. The war has to stop, and in the meantime, we have to continue to support the Yemenis so that they can feed their families, the children can survive, and we have these figures reduce.
More than 3 million people have been displaced, and close to 80% of the 29 million population is in need of aid for survival. The United Nations says in 2020 it received only $1.43 billion of the $3.2 billion needed to fund aid projects in Yemen.
Now, a Ukrainian confectioner is making hyper-realistic 3D cakes. She is fully booked till the end of 2022 because of her unique product. Let's find out more about her mind-blowing cakes in this report.
Ranging from swirling seascapes to horrific cakes with teeth, these amazing edible creations have been created by Kristina Dolnik. The 32-year-old Ukrainian is self-taught after first making a cake for her sister's wedding in 2015.
I don't treat it like a business. And I don't want to turn baking into business and mass production. I really like that every cake is unique.
Despite not having any formal training, Dolnik's creations sell like hotcakes. She often works until the early hours of the morning and spends up to 3 days crafting the incredibly detailed delights.
I never make the same cake twice, and not everyone can afford it. I don't mean that it's too expensive. What I mean is that the demand for cakes is so high that even if I bake my entire life, I still won't be able to meet it.
Her lifelike cakes are usually inspired by pop culture or everyday objects or places. But anyone who wants to enjoy one will need to find other hot cakes to quench their hunger for now, as she's booked up till 2022.
Prime Minister Imran Khan says farmers in developing countries cannot be left at the mercy of corporates. He was addressing the Governing Council of the International Agriculture Fund through video link. Khan said over 100 million children worldwide are stunted due to undernourishment, while 600 million suffer from hunger. The Prime Minister said the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to push another 100 million people into extreme poverty. He said international cooperation is needed to eliminate poverty and hunger. Khan said a global initiative on debt relief provided some relief to developing nations, but they need $4.3 trillion to recover from the pandemic. Now, the US air passenger volume has fallen by 60.1% in the year 2020, hitting its lowest since 1984. In a report, the Transportation Department said 368 million passengers flew on the US airlines in 2020 against 922.6 million in 2019. The report said international travel demand fell by 70.4% from 2019 due to travel restrictions. It said the American Airlines and United Airlines plan to furlough combined 27,000 workers as the federal aid to the airlines is expiring next month. The report added passenger volumes are unlikely to return to pre-COVID-19 levels before 2023 or 2024. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.